Can you speak a bit more about how empathy is different than compassion?
Yeah, thanks. Did you know that I wanted that question? Could you
Maybe.
see intention? See, it worked. No, I had a whole huge part of that on here, but we had to cut it out. So, okay, speak more to, okay, so empathy, now, the definition of it, first it depends on how we define empathy, and that, from what I've read, is even more elusive, the definition of empathy. There's emotional empathy, cognitive empathy, social empathy, behavioral empathy. So when I look at empathy, and I actually even wrote this down because Jamie said, you better be prepared to tell me what empathy is. And now I can't find it, but it doesn't matter. I mean, I think I pretty much know what it so empathy is really the shared experience of another, and emotional empathy is that idea that you can be in someone else's shoes and share that experience. So if we're looking at emotional empathy, it's a competency. So it is something that you're feeling, but it doesn't necessarily lead to compassion. So a lot of the researchers, and now Tanya Singer, Olga Klimecki, they're empathy researchers kind of, well, I'm making that up. I was going to say empathy researchers turn compassion researchers, but that's not true. But they researched empathy, and what they found out with fMRI studies and other studies was that empathy was a totally different construct, and empathy is neither required nor sufficient for compassion. So you can be empathetic with someone, so you can share their emotions and feel it and connect, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to have this, hopefully, the compassionate wisdom. It's not going to necessarily lead to that. Now, empathy can be a motivating factor. It can be a trigger for compassion. I'm not bashing empathy. It can be, but not necessarily. And then on the flip side, what some of the research is saying is empathy may not be required. They're saying it's not required for compassion. And that just gives me goosebumps, because how many people, are told maybe that you're not empathetic, you have problems with empathy. Well, maybe we don't need to train empathy. Maybe we have this other process. But again, it depends on how you define empathy. So if you're defining empathy as an increased insight and understanding into one's suffering, well, that's one of the components of compassion. That's one of the primers. So I hope that helps a little bit. And I do want to say this, because I have the opportunity, since we're talking about it. The fMRI research that Singer and Klimecki did, they did it with an advanced, Matthew Ricard, an advanced Zen meditator, Buddhist meditator. And what they showed was that when he would do the empathy meditation, so he would share the experience, there was, they showed him pictures of children suffering in videos, and then he had to just imagine, be with them in their suffering. The fMRI had areas in the brain with negative affect, and I think it was like anterior insula and anterior cingulate cortex. But it was areas of the brain, different areas of the brain than when he did the compassion meditation, like what we did, kind of that loving kindness, and then he was extending warmth and kindness. And the fMRI was activating the pro-social network, the social affiliation. And then he felt, as well as they did follow-up replicate studies, not fMRI, but with groups, and they coincided. And what they found was that in all cases, the empathy training group, they felt emotionally exhausted, more sensitive, so they did feel like they could pick up people's emotions, but even in everyday normal activities, and that was just emotionally exhausting. And that the compassion was opposite. They felt invigorated, they had a higher tendency to help others. And so some of what the researchers are saying here is that it's not empathy we need to train necessarily, it's the compassion we need to train. And then they've coined the term, instead of compassion fatigue, as empathic distress fatigue. If you're interested, email me. I have a lot more info, but look up Paul Bloom, Bloom. He's a clinical psychologist, professor at Yale, and he has an article in Boston Review that just came out. He's got actually a lot of stuff out for many years, but it's called Against Empathy, and it is quite thought-provoking, and it'll ruffle some feathers, and I've posted it, and I had some not very nice things said to me, but But it's the well, and then what's interesting is that it's so much of this is like it's language, because if you take, anytime you take the two groups, we're talking about the same constructs and the same things. It's just people are attached to the language. They've got their teddy bears and they're not in the van, they're in the car. So, right? Okay, so thank you.
All right, so we have time for one more question, but I see two questions. And one online. So Rajam's giving me the do one online. So we'll do that and then see where we are. Otherwise, Shelly's here. So the other questions, if you want.
And I'll try to answer this one faster.
Okay, Linda Crawford asked, do you use Neff's self-compassion test with clients, and has anyone yet used it as an outcome measure and correlate it with improved pain experience afterwards?
Okay, so thank you, Linda. So for the second part, yes, the self-compassion scale, that's the scale that's used in the studies that I quoted. So the studies that show increased compassion is related to in the context of people in pain. Neff's measure is used. Have I? Yes, I have, but I use it a little bit differently. So I don't always bring it out, right away. I don't have any system as to who I use it with or not. It's usually after quite a bit of time with people, and it's usually sort of organically comes up this idea that they may be interested in learning more about compassion or self-compassion, and kind of, I guess, a little bit of motivational interviewing, if they feel that they could use a little more self-compassion, if they think that's lacking. And as I think most of you can appreciate it, this is just sort of an organic, sort of natural thing that happens. And then what I'll do is because it's online, you can find it online, and then I'll give them the link, and then they do it on their own, and they don't, some people have come back to me and expressed, the results and that, but it's really for them, and then it just opens their eyes, and then we might have a little discussion, and as of now, I'm not really looking at the score and analyzing. It's just a conversation starter, and it confirms that, oh my goodness, I have, low compassion, and so it goes from there, it builds, and then we might do a self-compassion practice, which is, there's a lot of different self-compassion practices that obviously we can't get into now, but so I hope that answered your question, Linda. Thanks.
Thank you, Shelly, for a great talk. So we're going to have our final break of the